Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. And we are zooming in and focusing in on a very important question that needs to be addressed if you're really going to heal and let go of an emotional wound that was inflicted or created in a relationship with someone who is manipulative, someone who has betrayed you, violated social norms, someone who has perhaps been a malignant narcissist, someone who has overwhelmed you and sabotaged your happiness really without you knowing. They've done things to betray your confidence in them. Perhaps you've exposed them. You found out that they were cheating on you, or that they've been lying to you, or that this has been, they've been double dipping, they've been having an affair, or you're just not happy with the treatment. It's designed to be very unsupportive. And if you find this in your family of origin, if you find this in your workplace, if you find this in your marriage or within your siblings, and it's created this sort of rivalry or this conflict consciousness, what really happens to emotional pain that is buried? The emotional pain that is buried. Oftentimes, emotional pain can be so difficult and so uncomfortable to deal with that people have to resort to the defense mechanism of repression. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was probably one of the first to describe this psychological event, that of repression and suppression. And he had his old, a cigar isn't a cigar, it's a phallic symbol, and there's all this sort of, convoluted theory around, sublimation. However, repression is essentially when someone pushes down their immediate feelings in order to cope with a situation. And suppressing often is meaning the same thing, to, keep it quiet, to quiet your emotions, to quiet your inner voice, to repress, to push down, to sweep under the rug, to sweep into the closet, to bury from consciousness. One thing that's important to understand, though, about the human psyche is that what is repressed oftentimes creates a resistance, and it becomes stronger within an individual. In other words, the human mind is so vast and so powerful that it actually retains memories. You can recall images, settings, emotions, conversations, scents, laughter, images. This is part of your memory. You've got short-term memory, you've got long-term memory, and oftentimes these memories are triggered or retrieved through either specific triggers or stimulus in the environment, but those items that are repressed are oftentimes held just below the surface, and it keeps a tremendous amount of psychic energy to push them down. So what happens to these repressed memories, especially ones that are painful? Well, it really, if you can look at sort of when these events were created, was it in your youth, your teenage years, your 20s, your 30s? When did this emotional pain, when was it originally experienced? And so with that, you can see how long then it has been pushed down or repressed. But that which is created by resistance, it also makes it stronger. And so pushed down feelings, repressed feelings, oftentimes are locked and frozen in the subconscious mind. But they're always carried around like a 20-pound duffel bag. I mean, they're always with you. They're always there. Sometimes you can feel, the amount of psychic energy that it takes to push it down. In other words, sometimes you become conscious aware of it, that, wow, I'm carrying around a lot of emotional pain. Sometimes it becomes so painful that it's too painful to deal with. It's too catastrophic. It's too overwhelming. So even more defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms are required to push it down even harder. And, so it becomes buried emotions. It becomes buried emotional feelings, emotional manipulation, emotional neglect, emotional abuse, these things which are hurting of your feelings. And yeah, there's a lot of stigma. Oh, don't have your feelings hurt. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names can never hurt me. Actually, it does hurt you. And actually, it does take a lot of psychic energy to push these down, because eventually then they become frozen. They become locked in the subconscious. They become a chronic undergirding unhappiness, a chronic undergirding sadness, melancholy. If they're very fearful, if they create a lot of fear, people then can develop complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. In other words, they're so heavy, they're so prevalent, and they've been so reoccurring. In other words, they're so hurtful, so catastrophic, that they're really lingering there all the time right beneath the surface. And then they become problematic. They become triggered. Something that has nothing to correlate with the event will then set it off. It'll trigger and then flip the switch. It'll trip the switch to that whole bank of emotions. Oftentimes that which is based in fear, and the person becomes extremely fearful, paranoid, or they can trigger a lot of sadness, a lot of sorrow, a lot of melancholy. Tears will well up in the person, when they're grocery shopping. People will become very fearful, and they'll have to leave, a party. All of a sudden, something will be triggered. There's panic attacks. Something seemingly unrelated just sets off this whole flood of emotions. This can become very debilitating. This can become very overwhelming. This become very burdensome and very cumbersome to an individual who is dealing with a lot of buried feelings. So the buried feelings oftentimes can be so catastrophic that they really are at the core of the fight or flight reaction. In other words, life versus death, survival versus not surviving. It can become that severe, that black or white, that real, and that sort of urgency that is required to be dealt with. And if you are in a setting where you've got a trauma bond, essentially the trauma bond is created because the very people who you rely on or are loving or love or counting on or dreaming of a future with, these very people who you love are also the source of the trauma. They're the source of the emotional wounding. They are the source and the causative factor of that hurt. So there's this cognitive dissonance. There's this very, very problematic gray area which is developed. In other words, people who you should be attached to, connected to, bonded with, and all the neurochemicals that are associated with that, these very people are at the core of the wounding. So you have this attachment to wounding, and you have this really sort of confusing array of neurochemicals that I feel is then created and perpetuated, and it becomes a very confusing, debilitating, and troubling experience for the individual who is undergoing this trauma bond and this pressing down and repressing of feelings. They become frozen, they become stuck, they become strengthened in time through the conscious and then unconscious mechanism of avoiding and not dealing with. Because if the wounding is so catastrophic, so painful, so overwhelming, in other words, the immature psyche, the growing psyche hasn't hit the developmental stage to be able to know what it's dealing with and know how to manage itself, self-regulate, self-govern, i.e., don't be alarmed, this is, don't pay attention to that, or this person is just criticizing in one ear or the other, all these sort of emotional management skills, emotional intelligence skills. If these are not developed or early in their development, oftentimes they can be so overwhelming that they're set aside, like put on the back burner. Why don't I deal with this later? I will just have to put up and shut up. I have to tolerate. I have no choice. I have no option. I rely on this person. I am married to this person. I depend on this person. I want to be married to this person. This is my family. all these other settings which make the relationship sort of locked into place. In other words, there is no escape. And that is really the core of the trauma bond, is that it's unescapable emotional abuse, unescapable emotional manipulation, unescapable and repeated hurt feelings. In other words, you're a captor to the emotional abuser. There ain't no getting away. You live under their roof, you live under their block, you work under their roof, whatever it is, there is a feeling of not being able to get away or avoid or deal with. It's inescapable. And so that's when the trauma bond really gets severe and it gets frozen, it gets locked into place into the subconscious. And this is really the foundation of really what becomes a lifelong issue, with sorting it out and understanding the cause has created the effect in dealing with the frozen emotions. What happens to these emotions that become frozen? They become just that. They need to be revisited, warmed up, and allowed to flow in order to deal with and work through these. So things like these videos, these podcasts, these discussions, the community of support here is helping you to come to terms and deal with and manage and get a vocabulary around this confusion. The cause has created this effect. The why, the super big why did this happen? And what can I do about it now? How can I recover a sense of normalcy and emotional wellness and healing and deal with this and, let it go, process it, emotionally digest it, and then let it go to the ethers. Let it evaporate it. Disidentify with that trauma, that wounding, so it doesn't take up a lot of my psychic energy, which then becomes basically like your identity of being the victim. Your identity is created, by original experiences, which are repeated over time and become an ongoing mood. And then an ongoing mood reinforced over time becomes a temperament, and a temperament reinforced over time becomes an identity. It becomes a learned identity, a learned I am. Oftentimes, this identity can be one of negative validation. In other words, I am unlovable. I am not desirable. I am not deserving. The I am nots. Your identity can then be organized or centered or pivoted around negative descriptors, negative validation. I am invisible. I don't matter. I can't be heard. I can't be seen. I can't be felt. I am not important. I am relegated to the invisible. And so oftentimes this sort of cloak of invisibility is then sort of an after effect or a result of being ignored or having these very hurtful discoveries or criticisms to your core, which oftentimes are at the hands of emotional manipulators and emotional abusers, such as people who are malignant narcissists or psychopathic, people who take others for granted, who disempower others, who create a negative environment, a negative climate, a negative culture. Negative meaning surrounded by negative emotional states. Fear, anxiety, doubt, stress, versus the positive. Positive self-bias. In other words, positive self-esteem, valuing yourself, feeling that you deserve, that you have human dignity, that you have human rights. You have the inalienable right to be seen, to be heard, to be felt, to be listened to be taken seriously, to be validated, okay, to be, to have your viewpoint processed, acknowledged, and validated. Respect. This is then the foundation and the core of boundaries and standards, so that, your boundaries are protected. You're not violated. And oftentimes it's that violation energy that I call it. So it's just sort of a constant ongoing violation energy then that can pervade the close family or relationship unit. It can then, it then transfers and carries over into other relationships, other friendships, other work relationships. And so you've got this foundation, oftentimes, which is part of a repressed emotional feeling, a frozen in time, sort of based on situations, once again, which are so painful to address, that they're too overwhelming to address at the time. So they get frozen into space. It's like, you know, a container of ice cream that has been in your freezer for way too long. It's too hard. It's freezer burnt. It's inedible. It should be thrown out, but it's still there. You can't quite get it out, but it's sure, you know, maybe it's, you know, it was in the freezer while it defrosted, so it started to be dealt with, and it just made a big mess. But either way, it's no longer what it used to be. It's no longer the wonderful fresh pint of ice cream. It's now this frozen block of goo, yuck, whatever it is. It's not edible. And this is really kind of what frozen and repressed feelings are like. They are frozen deep within, in the deep emotional freezer. Yet it's kind of like it's still going around with you in your relationships. It tends to then sabotage things that you try to do to move forward, your current relationships, things which don't have anything wrong with them, which are perfectly fine, normal, but then you get triggered. People then get triggered. They get fearful. They sabotage the relationship. They can't move forward in their profession. They have a law of the lid, which is very, very small or very low. I cannot. I will not. I don't deserve. I don't deserve to earn my keep. I don't deserve to earn enough money. I don't deserve to live in a hospitable place. I deserve to live on the wrong side of the tracks. I will never have this. I will never have that. All these sort of self-determined proclamations based on negative validation. These issues that are frozen or locked in the subconscious, which you can tell when they are sort of carry over and they disrupt normal, natural situations like your work environment, like your healthy relationships, like everyday activities. When people have an anger problem, you know, the source of the stimulus is not equal to the response. And, you know, somebody has one little thing happen, they get a parking ticket or one little thing that they should be, you know, man, I should have checked it. Instead, you know, their reaction is way to the ceiling, freaking out, flipping out, whatever it is. The response does not equal the stimulus. And this is oftentimes the cause of there's these frozen feelings and experiences which were either experienced a long time ago or were very severe and intense and extreme and painful and, you know, oftentimes presented to a person before they were able to deal with it emotionally. They were too young. They didn't have a mature psyche to be able to sort it out. You know, the 6-year-old can't certainly raise a 35-year-old parent. You know, all these different situations. You know, the 6-year-old can't deal with teenage issues from their siblings. You know, why should a 6-year-old be trying to settle the score and be the peacemaker between a teenager and their parents? I mean, there's all sorts of situations which can create these frozen, repressed memories and feelings. And then once again, you know, it goes then to the identity. The experiences repeated over time become a mood. Mood reinforced over time becomes a temperament. And temperament over time reinforced becomes an identity. Dr. Joe Dispenza. Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Wonderful book. I would definitely check it out if you're into this advanced information. And so it's important to understand, acknowledge, and validate and work through these frozen negative feelings. You have to revisit them. You have to take a look at them from a neutral and mature, objective standpoint. Being able to understand the cause has created the effect. Understand and sort out what were the things said, what were the feelings, what was not right, where did this all come from? So you can deal with it and work through it so it stops sabotaging your current events. It stops sabotaging your current relationships. It stops sabotaging your lack of progress, your lack of growth, your lack of financial growth, your lack of personal growth, spiritual growth, relationship growth. You can tell usually that there's going to be some area in your life which is not, where it should be. And I'm just going to adjust this real quick, if we can do that. Okay, there we go. So there's usually going to be some area of your life which is causing the issue. In other words, where you're seeing the symptoms. You're acknowledging that there's something there that is symptomatic, problematic, and needs to be dealt with. It's important to kind of look at the roots, the causes created this effect, and then why these feelings got frozen. In other words, did things occur to you earlier in life where you couldn't speak up, you couldn't talk back, you couldn't say, this isn't fair, this isn't right. It was not the right time, it wasn't the right place, you weren't the right age. Or likewise with, a marriage, is it too difficult to deal with a cheating partner? Is it too difficult to deal with an absent partner, emotionally absent? Is it too difficult to deal with pathological lying? It's getting the resources and the skills to be able to deal with it and confront it. But if you can't do that with this person, you can certainly have growing awareness to be able to identify and then process it in the present moment, so you can restore a sense of now, a sense of presence, a sense of being, a sense of being, just content in a peaceful, comfortable body, not feeling the sort of tugging of emotional discontent, emotional wounding, so that you're not walking around a slobbering mess. You're not, triggered during situations when you shouldn't be crying in the grocery store, crying at your church for no reason. All of a sudden, you want to throw a tantrum and confront somebody. Oftentimes, this is the result of frozen emotions and experience which are locked in order to be dealt with later. Like, let me save this until later and let me put this on the back burner. That's what the mind does. It sort of represses and suppresses. But yet, those are the situations that need to be retrieved, dealt with, looked at, and felt in order to be dissipated, in order to be dissolved, in order to be handled and then disidentified with, and then allowed to run free into the emotional ether, to be able to be released and allow the divine to process and deal with those situations, and deal with whatever karma or whatever the divine creator wants to do with it. But it's important to let it out. Let it, uncork. Let it breathe. Like a bottle of champagne, whoosh, it might just like pop up really quick and you're like, OMG, now I realize where all this is coming from. I get it now. This is when this wound first occurred. This is how it was repeated. This is how it was reinforced. This is why I couldn't handle it then, and this is why I want to handle and deal with it now. So it's important to be able to take times in the privacy of these videos or podcasts, or however it is that you're taking these on the go, to really offer yourself the opportunity to do this inner work, to do this, what people might call shadow work. Shadow meaning the subconscious, or where the light has not allowed to, it's like the emotional cavern, get it out, see what's in there, so you can let light and let air get to it, get out those frozen emotional blocks, which are literally still blocking you in the present. And you can feel, because they'll either hold you back, and you'll say, I always feel like there's more to me, there's more to life than what I'm really living. I'm really not letting myself have fun. I'm not letting myself relax. I'm not letting myself enjoy. I'm not letting myself love, or the big one, I'm not letting myself be loved. Oftentimes, this is where you see it come up when there's opportunities for people to give you, a handshake, an acknowledgement, a validation, and, a recognition or award. And then that person goes, I'm not that good. I'm not that smart. I'm not intelligent. and they disidentify with a positive. They don't identify with positive self-esteem. They don't, identify with being relaxed. They don't identify with being at peace. They don't identify with getting along with others. They don't think it's possible. It's because they've got this wounded inner core. So if that is you, really begin to look at that, identify it, and begin to melt it down a little bit. Begin to revisit it if you can, if it's comfortable, and begin to spend time just sort of reflecting and looking back at when these issues occurred, when and why did they get sort of stuck there, and begin to chip away little by little so the floodgates can come through and they can melt away, they can be looked at and identified so they no longer pollute or contaminate or sabotage your present life, your present day, your present minute, your present relationships, as well as then your future. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. You can do it. Unlock those frozen hurt feelings, revisit them, understand the cause that's created the effects, begin to let them go in love and light. You can do it.